still rattling the area in the west.
And predicted to be at its worst and potentially most deadly from Friday into Monday, with some 28 million people likely to be dealing with triple-digit temperatures. From Southern California to Washington state, the region is tinder dry, making wildfires more frequent, more destructive, and more widespread.
Fox's Jonathan Hunt. 2 weeks after the collapse of the condo tower near Miami, the number of confirmed dead rises to 64, with 76 missing.
As the work continues, families were brought to the site and shared a moment of silence with first responders. Mayor Levine Cava said at the same time, investigators have been tagging evidence amid the pile. But for now, recovery and closure for families remains the top priority.
Fox's Gernal Scott. Pfizer says it plans to ask regulators to approve a third COVID-19 vaccine dose, which it says will boost immunity and help against the new variants. But shortly after that announcement, the CDC and the FDA issued a joint statement saying Americans who have been fully vaccinated do not need a booster shot at this time. And the Dow dropped 259 points. America's listening to Fox News.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Bank Pacific. Happy 67th anniversary. Viva Bank Pacific!
Bank Pacific, serving our Pacific communities for 67 years. Where others put branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Equal housing lender, member FDIC.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Japan announces Tokyo will hold the Summer Olympic Games without any spectators. The government fears the Olympics could become a COVID super spreader event.
State of emergency was called in response to growing infection rates for at least until the 22nd of August. This means that 2021 Games will be largely a TV-only event from the opening ceremony to the closing.
Fox's Amy Kellogg. Sir Richard Branson will be on board the Virgin Galactic spacecraft when it launches its first full crew into suborbital space on Sunday. That's just days before Jeff Bezos will fly on his Blue Origin to the edge of space. So are private spacecraft safe?
I think as far as space flights go, they're probably as safe as you can get. I do think they are safe. There's always a risk.
Former NASA astronaut Mike Massimino talking to the Fox News Rundown. Another win for Phoenix puts the Suns closer to becoming NBA champs.
A deep burn helps the Phoenix Suns pad their NBA Finals lead.
Others have picked up the scoring slack. Chris Paul, Booker, long three-pointer. That's good! Way downtown from Booker.
Mike Breen on ABC. Devin Booker drains a three-pointer, 1 of 7 from behind the arc for him. Booker with the team-high 31 points as the Suns top the Milwaukee Bucks Thursday, 118-108. Phoenix shooting a combined 50% from three-point range, enough to overcome a 42-point night out of Bucks star Giannis Antetokounmpo. The Suns now with the 2-0 series edge in the NBA Finals as this best-of-7 heads to Milwaukee for Game 3 on Sunday. Matt Napolitano, Fox News.
And the hot weather's packing the beaches, so what better time for another Shark Week? The Discovery Channel has a bunch of celebrities ready to help host its 45 hours of programming on the toothy sea creatures starting Sunday. I'm Carmen Roberts, and this is Fox News.
Leah Dunca from Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Hafaday, this is Congressman St. Nicholas. Your congressional office would like to remind you that pandemic unemployment assistance is set to expire on September 6th of this year. We encourage the people of Guam to seek out active employment as much as possible, as jobs continue to remain limited, and we want to prevent hardship for our people at the conclusion of the PUA program. Thank you, and situas mahase.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Diving and seeing our coral reef full of life.
I really love hiking the trails.
I really love going to the beach. The sunsets are amazing.
Your island needs you. Help preserve what makes our island home. Stop those who threaten our wildlife, plants, and environment. Install the free TOCA app and report poaching, littering, burning, and other environmental crimes. Call 864-TOCA or install the free TOCA app today. This public service announcement is brought to you by the Department of Agriculture, UOGC Grant, and Choice Broadcasting.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A good way to start off the show on what is our least favorite day of the week. Yes, it's Friday already. That means we got 2 whole days in purgatory, no tall tales, no tailgaters. But as usual, Jose and I will somehow make it through.
We always do.
We always do. We always have. We'll be back on Monday at 1600, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Well, let's go straight to Zemi Ikatni. So today the Daily News has decided, I suspect they down in the editorial boardroom they were thinking, what can we do to rehabilitate bailout barns, also known as stink bomb barns?
Did a little bit of barnstorming themselves.
Yeah. So the title of the editorial is Our View, the Berada Act, Important to Growing Our Own Healthcare Future. If there ever was a piece of legislation that this island needs right now, it's legislation introduced by Vice Speaker Tina Munya Barnes to help students who want to pursue degrees in healthcare fields secure sponsorships and funding for their tuition. I'm just overwhelmed. The Berada Act, or Return Act, supports the Professional Student Exchange Program, which allows students to access health care programs at 60 universities across the country. Students who choose to pursue a degree in 10 designated health fields, from medicine to dentistry to veterinary science, can save between $32,000 and $160,000. The Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education hosts the program. Bill 158 is intended to support funding health care education for residents and to incentivize them to return and practice on Guam after they graduate. Guam's demand for quality health care has always exceeded supply. We have to look off-island to attract physicians here, to open practices here, and take on the risks of practicing here. We are not the same as the mainland USA. We don't have many of the specialists required here. We don't have the population to support many specialists. So it leaves the island's family and internal medicine physicians to take on these special cases, and most of them do. I thought I all of a sudden switched to Bill 112 there. Yeah, so little propaganda on behalf of Bailout Barnes' position on Bill 112. But if we look to the future, we can start to map what our healthcare infrastructure could look like. We must look at ways to gown our own. I thought that's what they did at the university.
I thought they only had white coats.
Yeah. Yeah. What do we see now that we need for our future? The Birada Act does that. Not only does it ease the way for the program to work, but it also provides incentives to return home and work here. The past few weeks, there have been very tough conversations and deliberations about the future of our healthcare infrastructure on Guam. We can't afford to weaken our infrastructure when we are already in a fragile state. Let's please vote down Bill 112. Oh, wait a minute. That's not what it says. It just kind of meant what it means, right? Let's make sure we have the infrastructure we need at home so that when graduates of programs are ready to come home, they can afford to practice here. Let's make sure that we listen to local radio programs and local talk show hosts like Bob on Tall Tales so we can support our own intellectual infrastructure here on island. Isn't that what the editor? No, it didn't say that, but it should, right? All right, so much for the Daily News. I got a feeling that's not going to be the Blue Star today.
They spelled growing wrong. It's Groaning. Groaning.
Groaning, yeah. All right. The Post takes on fake luxury goods. Buying fake luxury goods could have unintended consequences. Like you could buy that nice gold necklace and put it on your neck in the morning, and by nightfall you'll have a green ring around your neck. Unintended consequences, right, Jose?
That's not a bonus.
No, it's not a bonus. Buying fake luxury goods could have unintended consequences. In recent months, Customs and Quarantine Agencies stopped attempts to flood more than 23,000 counterfeit items into Guam, from handbags to face masks to watches. The items were made to mimic designer products and carry the unauthorized logos of high-end fashion brands. I don't want to get off the subject here, but I hope that's not Tello's purse. I hope Tello's purse is not a fake luxury brand after all of the fuss that people made about it, right? Customs will keep the confiscated items pending the Guam Office of Attorney General's review on whether the items will be needed as evidence in a legal case or cases. When a case is resolved, Customs will dispose of the items by taking them to the flea market. No, by destroying them and tossing them into the landfill. Ike Pareto, Customs and Quarantine Director, has said anyone caught trying to bring these items into the island could face criminal charges resulting in fines or worse. I want the public to understand that bringing counterfeit items into Guam is a violation of the Trademark Counterfeiting Act. Customs officers will seize all these items. Now, you know, I wear a lot of polo shirts on the air here, Jose, but the labels you see on there are always genuine. You'll never catch me wearing a counterfeit Kmart shirt.
It says M-Mart on it.
Yeah. The attempts to bring bogus versions of luxury products seem to have a market on Guam that is willing to pay certain prices for these knockoffs. A lot of these masks are in demand. What we're seeing is that they are using the logos of registered products. You need permission from the rightful owner to import those items. If not, then you are violating the law. The owners of these illegally copied products, such as Louis Vuitton, Prada, Gucci, Chanel, and Rolex, are not the only victims of these crimes. Guam's consumers must know that the money they spend on buying knockoff merchandise could impact the incomes of people who work for the luxury brand makers. This criminal activity has damaging consequences for our economy and for honest businesses and their employees, said U.S. Senator Susan M. Collins. Wow. Republican just barely from Maine.
A knockoff herself?
Yeah, a knockoff herself. Yeah, she wears that R around, but it's not really hers. She's the chairwoman of the Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. And yet, here we are, more than a decade later, and we are still seeing counterfeit goods being brought into the island. This also means we still have people willing to buy fake goods. So if you see somebody trying to sell a T-shirt that has the Tall Tales logo on it, or coffee cups or beer can sleeves, that kind of merch that's got the Tall Tales logo on it, it's fake. I have not authorized those. We're working on it, but it's not available just yet.
It's that guy down on the sidewalk selling it.
Yeah, right. The sidewalk vendor, right? Counterfeiting luxury goods in many parts of the globe is run by organized crime, according to international and U.S. authorities. And while it may not be apparent that buying a fake Louis Vuitton bag or fake Prada shoes is a way of giving money to the criminal underworld, the effect of buying a knockoff could go that deep. In many parts of the world, international, regional, and national law enforcement authorities have uncovered intricate links between the trafficking of counterfeit goods and other serious offenses, including illicit drugs, money laundering, and corruption, according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime report. Organized crime groups such as the Triads and Yakuza in Asia have diversified into illicit trafficking of counterfeit goods while at the same time being involved in crimes carrying from drug and human trafficking to extortion and money laundering. A lot of the recently counterfeit items seized on Guam came from areas throughout the Pacific Rim, Paredes said. He confirmed that items are known to originate from the Philippines, Korea, China, and Singapore. Buying a knockoff handbag could also support terrorism, stated Collins. How did she get back in there? Anyhow, the opening sentence of this editorial is, well, to make a short story long and to fill up a large news hole, we got to kind of keep saying the same thing over and over again.
The only thing more boring and longer is a Guam line.
Yeah.
Rev and tax.
Rev and tax. All right. So I don't know what happened to the Post. Have they lost their mojo? They were doing so well for so long. And then they came out with that I hate to even use the word editorial for what they put out on July 5th. A let's beat up on the 4th of July type of screed. Okay, so here we have the card for today. And for a change of pace, we're going to have to spend an awful lot of time on medical malpractice. But for a change of pace, I'm going to start out with Bavacqua versus racial hierarchy. He came out with another column today. And then we've got Therese, as you were the governor of Guam versus Therese and the folks. So Now Therese has the heads of two other branches of the government, beating up on her bill, the governor and the chief justice. Then we've got Therese versus the chief justice, Trump versus Facebook, the governor versus Judge Uriarte, Steve versus Jerry Kitchen, and so on. So let's start out with Bavacqua's column for today. And as usual, what he has done, and calls it a column, he has strung together a series of anecdotes, none of which have any guarantee of independent trustworthiness. There's no time, no date, no location, no person, no name, no source. I got this from Bob Rogers' book or something. It's just stuff that Bavacqua wants you to know. Did he make it up? Is it the product of an oral interview that he did? He doesn't tell us. We're just supposed to take it on faith. Chamorro struggled with U.S. racial hierarchy. Now, I'm going to go straight to the end of the column first, because you really need that so you can see what he's driving at with his anecdotes. This is what he says. Looking to the conversations around racial justice that persist today. Now, what are the conversations around racial justice that persist today? Critical race theory. The heroism of George Floyd. The fact that the police shot another black person today. In other words, there's all the burning of American cities last summer. So what we have here is critical race theory, which has been kind of hiding in the weeds up until George Floyd came along, a career criminal who supports probably some of his 5 children, who was breaking the law, on and on and on, who has now, the latest initiative is to carve his face in Mount Rushmore next to Teddy Roosevelt's, right? And there should be another spire that would be 560 feet tall. Washington Monument's only 555. Next to the Washington Monument, the George Floyd Monument. Because we hear of all his heroism. George Floyd was so heroic that day. So I just mentioned that looking to the conversations around racial justice that persist today, that helped lead to the passage of Juneteenth as a holiday, we can see ourselves navigating that racial hierarchy. Now, when he says ourselves, if he were using Ifinu Chamorro, it would not be what's the words I'm looking for here? It would not be we inclusive. It would be we exclusive. It would not be Hita, which is we inclusive. Hita means we, meaning the person I'm talking to. Hame means we, meaning not you, but those folks out there. So if he were writing this in Chamorro, ourselves would be Hame, not Hita. We can see ourselves still navigating that racial hierarchy, parenthesis, just like African Americans in the wake of George Floyd. We are still trying to figure out our place within the racial hierarchy. We want to be different. We want to be separate, right? We want everybody to remember that captain back in 1904 and all of the horrible things he said about us. We are still trying to figure out our place within, hopefully not losing ourselves in the process. So that's the punchline. Now here's how he gets there. For Chamorros, navigating the racial politics of the United States in the first half of the 20th century was difficult. Now, how would he know that? That was 70 years ago. You know, I can tell you a little bit about the first half of the 20th century. Even prior to leaving Guam, there were already pressures to stop speaking their language and assimilate. The Navy started these sorts of programs prior to World War II, and they continued in both public and private forms after the war, including up till 1973 by the government of Guam, which had been in existence for 23 years. Once Chamorros migrated to the U.S., they would struggle to find a place in the existing social and racial hierarchy. The stories that we often collect about people not knowing what Guam or what Chamorro is nowadays are not new. In fact, the ignorance of the U.S. was a lot less forgiving a century ago. The ignorance of the U.S. a century ago. Chamorros, like other groups, were sometimes forced to change their names to make them easier for the dominant group to pronounce. They were denied opportunities or paid less because of their skin color.
Well, for one thing, they weren't called Chamorros.
No, they were Guamanians back in those days.
If we're being picky about history.
Yeah. They were denied opportunities or paid less because of their skin color. Chamorros who were lighter in complexion were able to avoid some forms of discrimination. Many of them ended up assimilating into other similar ethnic groups. Some because of their last names already being Spanish in origin, and knowing some Spanish became Latino or Mexican. Yeah, I know. No, I've never even heard of that, to tell you the truth. I know of several Chamorros in the early 20th century 1910, right, who decided to pass as Arabic or Middle Eastern, since those groups were often considered to be legally, quote, white in the U.S. at the time. Every year, a handful of people from the states who have recently learned about their Chamorro heritage contact me wanting to know more about a great-grandparent and their island home. Now, isn't that interesting? What's it doing in the middle of his column? This is his method of qualifying his expertise.
Sounds like a doctor's testimony for 1112.
Really? In my oral history research, I remember finding one of the starkest examples of these difficult choices that Chamorros faced in the experiences of two men who joined the Navy in the 1930s. This was a time when both men, despite their abilities, were racially restricted in terms of their service. Now, somebody posted on Facebook that, you know, if you were not a citizen during the 1930s, some of the things you could do in the Navy were somewhat restricted to you. I haven't researched that. I don't know if that's correct, but that's what he said. Like other non-white groups, they could only work as cooks and stewards. They served alongside African Americans, Filipinos, Latinos, and other groups, all of whom were considered to be, quote, lower than the white Americans who commanded them. One of these Chamorro men saw black sailors were often treated the worst of all the crew and developed feelings of antagonism to them. He heard the racist rhetoric that his white superiors used with black sailors and ended up using it himself. His unconscious hope was likely that by parroting his white superiors, he would move closer to them on the racial hierarchy of America, further away from blacks that he perceived to be on the bottom. The other Chamorro sailor also saw how his fellow non-white sailors were being treated, but instead of looking down on them, felt solidarity with them. He described how the stewards would look out for each other and help each other navigate the racist system. One way the Chamorros and other groups would do this was by participating in extracurricular activities within the Navy, hoping that their fellow white sailors might see them as more than just a skin color. Looking to the conversation, and that leads up to what I read first off. Now, if that's really all you got to write about, you might ask yourself, is this trip really necessary? You know, how does this shed any light on anything other than the fact, Michael Bavacqua, that you're a separatist and you want Guam to separate from the United States? You haven't told us what's going to happen then, like it doesn't matter, and that you think that you have to use that same critical race theory technique in order to lay the foundation for your separatist movement. Bad things happened a long time ago. We judge those bad things as though they happened yesterday. We apply today's manners, morals, and ethics to those things, ignoring anything that may have happened in between. And then because of those bad things that happened a long time ago, we ought to be able to cash in. We ought to be able to get what we want, whether it's reparations, separation from the United States, you name it. And especially now that we're lionizing George Floyd. You know, that we, the implicit invitation here is, come on, you guys, let's hitch our wagon to George Floyd's star. Look how well it's working for those guys. We need to get really lined up with them.
Speaking of losing people and losing yourself in the process, I think people have lost their minds in trying to figure out this George Floyd thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so that's Michael Bavacqua's contribution for today. Let's take a short break, and I'll come back to the governor versus Therese and the folks.
Now you can listen to The Point on radio.com. And radio.com gives you so much more. Local news stations give you what's going on in your community, yet national news from CBS, CNN, or Fox News Radio. Take a break with one of the hundreds of music, sports, and talk stations. Love podcasts? Radio.com has thousands of true crime, comedy, kids and family podcasts, and more. Listen anytime, anywhere, on your PC, smart speakers, and a variety of connected devices. Or download the radio.com app now from the App Store or Google Play.
Attention men and women in uniform, veterans and reservists. Get ready for the 77th Liberation Hike and Bike. Get up and move with the Silkies Hike. And easy bike along Marine Corps Drive with stops at historic sites and monuments with a super hot cool down at Paseo. Hike rally at 7 a.m. on Liberation Day in Assen. Bike rally 7 a.m. at Paseo. Let's beat suicide with humor and camaraderie. Sign up at Eventbrite. Look for Silkies Hike Guam 1 and check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Made possible by Gotcha 671, Irreverent Warriors, Freedom Grinders, and Veterans Helping Veterans.
Now, more Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie. Spitting truth like watermelon seeds at a summer picnic. Call now, 888-TALK, 888-8255.
I got to go back to my card again. I omitted one important item. So we started out with Bavacqua versus racial hierarchy. Then we go to Therese versus, as you were, the governor versus Therese and the folks. And then Gideon versus Wainwright. And then Therese versus the Chief Justice. So let's go next to the governor versus Therese and the folks. Governor weighs in on medical malpractice bill. Now, she has a special amount of credibility here. She's a nurse. Remember, our governor is a nurse, and she said if she ever loses her job, she'll be able to go back to work. Yeah. More people have weighed in on a controversial medical malpractice bill, including Governor Lou Leon Guerrero. The governor acknowledged both the good intent of the bill, but also the threat to Guam's healthcare system that the bill could inadvertently present. I'm really hoping that the author of the legislation will listen and not put this bill on the floor and go back and meet with the doctors, meet with the ones that make testimonies, meet with the attorneys, meet with the consumers, and have a much better, well-rounded and more comprehensive information about it, and see if there's something that can come out as a result of this, the governor said in an interview with Patty Arroyo. So maybe Therese should have an interview with Patty Arroyo. So, you know, we ordinarily, under our tripartite system of government, it's not sort of a town hall meeting in the park where somebody stands up and says, I want to talk about medical malpractice. And we have this long, drawn-out group discussion without any rules, without any point, and especially without any focus. We don't do that. The way we make decisions amongst the people here, amongst our people, is we have a legislature and members of the legislature who have something that they think bears thought and discussion, draft bills, and they introduce the bills. And the bills become the focal point of the discussions with public hearings. That's exactly what Therese did. And she's the chairman of the committee. And I just have this sneaking suspicion that as wide open as she lets these hearings go, she's not banging her gavel saying, that's not what this bill is about, get back on track. She doesn't do that. I have a sneaking suspicion if another Joe went down there and started talking about compact impact, she'd let him go. Yeah. So that's exactly what Therese is doing. And I give her extremely high marks for the way she's going about it. She had an informational meeting, which was a good target for stink bomb Barnes.
Oh, speaking of, she didn't mute microphones either.
And she didn't. She kept Janella away from the technical equipment that would mute the microphones. And then she had another hearing just a couple days ago, once again making a nice target for stink bomb Barnes. And she's introduced all coming. They stayed till like 11:30 on Tuesday night. And she says, I'm going to schedule even another hearing. So that's exactly what she's doing, Governor. You just don't like what some of the people are saying, that's all. So that's why you'd like to see her withdraw the bill, all in the name of separation of powers, right? She goes on to say, I always believe that something good always comes out, even in controversial situations.
Don't get me started, Bob.
Really. Or even in a conflicting situation. Like most of the doctors said, there is a solution. Well, I go back to Thomas Sowell. There are no solutions, there are only alternatives. And I was talking with somebody else today, and I came up with this analogy that describes where the doctors are in this. We have the Triple MAA, Mandatory Medical Malpractice Arbitration Act, that says as a condition precedent to filing suit in the Superior Court, you got to go through $50,000 worth of arbitration. And as a result, I don't know that there has ever been an arbitration. Certainly, none of the doctors trotted out any statistics at the hearings saying, look how well this works. Here are the records. Here are the files. Nor did I hear any of the doctors take up any of his time saying, this is such a great procedure. It must have been the product of geniuses. It works so well. It's so fair, so even-handed, and it almost always reaches the correct result. I really like the Mandatory Medical Malpractice Arbitration Act. It's really well. I didn't hear anything like that. The only thing I heard was people say was, don't take it away. So imagine you got a bottle, and inside that bottle you've got whiskey, and you want to lay the bottle on its side, but you don't want to run the risk of spilling any whiskey if you're careless the way you put the bottle on its side. So you get a cork, and you stick the cork into the neck of the bottle. Now, when people drink the whiskey, when they see this, when they see what they've done, they'll spend hours telling you, man, that is really a great cork. I'll bet it came from Ireland. Look at the texture of that cork. Oh, it's so... And look how tightly it fits into the neck of the bottle. What a work of craftsmanship. You must have paid a fortune for that cork. On and on. People don't say that. You know, if I were to say, what do you think of the cork? Well, it keeps the whiskey from spilling, don't it?
It's getting in my way.
It keeps the whiskey from spilling, don't it? And that's the only, and that is exactly the malpractice arbitration. It keeps the whiskey from spilling. It keeps the suits from being filed. It's not that they're so crazy about arbitration. It's just crazy about not having any suits filed, and they know why. Because of the MMAA. So I always believe that, as you were, like most of the doctors said, there is a solution. Their solution is leave it alone. Monga mapatsa, don't touch it. But they don't believe that Bill 112 is a solution, the governor said. A public hearing on Bill 112 Wednesday night at the Guam legislature, there's no verb in that sentence. The comments both for and against the controversial bill caused the hearing to stretch past the 5-hour mark. Although some testified in support of the bill, the medical community came out, and these are the right words, in force to oppose it. The medical community cited concerns that Bill 112 would expose good practitioners to too much risk, which will result in a mass exodus of healthcare providers. Now, the risk, as I understand it from what I've read and from watching the hearing, is this, that because of a paucity of proper specialists here, doctors are performing in areas outside of their normal range of competence. They're not staying in their own lane, as Ray said this morning. And they see that if there's a mishap there, they could be sued for medical malpractice, because to prove up medical malpractice, the plaintiff, first of all, proves up the standard of care, and next shows that the doctor didn't comply and conform with the standard of care. So they're saying, right now, we're not conforming to the standard of care, and we don't want to get sued for malpractice. So if you unpack that, isn't this what they're saying? We know we're not practicing in accordance with the standard of care, but we're getting away with it because of the MMAA. I think that's what they're saying, you know?
That goes into a definition of what malpractice is.
Exactly.
Which nobody did.
No. Well, it's in Tina's bill, and I mean in Teresa's bill, and it's the same as it is in the MMAA. But if they're saying that's what's scaring them, the fact that they're going outside their lane, which might cause them to be sued if they screw up, But, we've been getting away with it, so let's just keep getting away with it.
So it's just the cork that's stopping them from being sued right now.
Exactly. It's a cork in the bottle. They don't care about they just don't want the whiskey to spill, that's all. Yeah. So, if that's the case, then would it be more honest for the doctors to hire counsel to draft up a paragraph of the standard that they want to be in place? A suit for malpractice shall not lie against a doctor who, because the correct specialist is not available, is forced or is who, because the correct requisite specialist is not available, as a matter of necessity, must perform in that area of medicine.
And isn't this something they discuss with their patient also beforehand?
Yeah, I don't think that I don't think a patient can waive the standard care. I don't think you could say, I'm really not a surgeon, but if I don't cut that bump off the end of your nose, you're going to die of cancer. I'm not a surgeon. So I'm going to prick your finger here and dip this pen in it, and you could sign this waiver in blood. And then I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can waive that kind of tort. But I don't see why the statute couldn't be amended to be upfront along the lines that I mentioned. If that's what the big concern is, then we can pull the cork out. And the whiskey still isn't going to spill so long as doctors are careful with that bottle. All right.
Which we're assuming they already are.
Well, we are assuming that. And I'm going to get back to George Macris's article again. And George Macris says some of these guys are not. They're just not doing it. Yeah. So going back to the governor's testimony against Teresa's bill, specialists are considered to be especially vulnerable because Guam's relatively small population already makes it financially difficult for many to practice on island. A solution that was suggested more than once was to make arbitration more affordable rather than to do away with it. I know what we'll do is we'll just pass a law that says that anyone who arbitrates a medical malpractice claim shall not be paid. Just make them do it for nothing. Wouldn't that work? Yeah. After a long night of testimony, mostly against Bill 112, the bill's primary sponsor, Speaker Therese Terlahi, said she still hopes for a solution. Thank you so much for dedicating so much of your time for tonight, for sharing your stories, your tragedies, for sharing your resumes, your skills, and your dedication to the people. That's what we all have in common, so thank you very much. And I do believe we can find common ground. I've not lost hope on that. That's how Therese wound it up. So the governor, Barnes brought the Chief Justice in. The governor brought herself in. And let's see here. Oh yeah, I've got some testimony from the folks. I started out with someone who I hope is not just howling at the moon. Okay, let's take a short break here leading up to the big halftime show.
Pastrami is back at Subway. Pepper-crusted beef layered with crispy pickles, mustard, and melted provolone cheese. Nothing comes close to the pleasure of sinking your teeth into that chewy, juicy, well-seasoned pastrami. It's happiness in a sub. Head down to the nearest Subway restaurant and satisfy your craving for the deli perfection that is pastrami. Subway. Eat fresh. Pastrami sub is available to all Subway locations on Guam and Saipan, including NCS for a limited time only.
This Liberation Day, join PBS Guam as we take you village to village, paying tribute to those who've made sacrifices for us to live as we do today. Tune in on July 21st at 9 a.m. and experience over 3 hours of exclusive interviews, musical performances, and more. This celebration of Guam's 77th will air on PBS Guam, KGTF, Channel 12, and streaming on the PBS Guam Facebook and YouTube pages. This special broadcast is made possible by PBS Guam, our generous supporters, and Choice Broadcasting.
Okay, so here's Lynn Wolf. Please do not let the island be bullied into disregarding the need for Bill 112, a bill aimed to reestablish the rights of patients to seek compensation for medical malpractice. It seems as if the medical community of Guam is holding the island hostage. Not a bad turn of phrase. Yeah. If you don't let me pitch, I'm going to take my ball and go home and see how you play baseball.
Well, that was interesting that the article mentioned that there were more people who were opponents of 112, i.e. doctors and medical practitioners, as opposed to people who were in favor. And I'm like, no kidding. We just got threats from a clinic that they're pulling out, got threats from a doctor that they're going to stop their care. Who would go up there and do it publicly?
Yeah, so I went to the doctor the other day. I had a sore throat. And I said, I got a sore throat, doc. You want me to open my mouth and say, ah? And the doctor said, no, I want you to open your mouth and tell me why I shouldn't fire you because you're in favor of Bill 112. Oh, sorry, doc. Yeah. It seems as if the medical community of Guam is holding the island hostage. As reported on local news, an established medical practice here on island is threatening to relocate to Hawaii if the bill passes. I think that's Tom Shea.
I think so, too.
Yeah, now I don't know if there's any truth to this rumor that when Tom Shea said that, several people said, will someone please establish a countdown? A large clinic is threatening to suspend certain services, forcing people to go off-island for medical procedures and treatments if the bill passes. This reminds me of when the legislature was thinking of increasing the gross receipts tax to 5%, and all of the grocery stores on island said they were going to quit selling groceries. As a healthcare worker, this is Lynn again, I decided to do a bit of research before deciding if I was going to support Bill 112. The concept of mandatory medical arbitration is rooted purely in financial, not ethical motivation, and was spearheaded by Wall Street and insurance companies in the 1980s to increase profits. Now, I just want to stop here for a minute and talk about arbitration. If you are in the HR field at all, you'll know one of the big battlegrounds is this, that when employees come on board new companies, many companies make them sign a paper that any HR disputes will be settled by arbitration, not lawsuits. So if you've got some kind of an equal opportunity, sexual harassment, discriminate, whatever, you can't sue. You got to go through arbitration. And it's people don't like it, you know. And the whole arbitration thing, now, I don't know if I'm in a position to say it was Wall Street and insurance companies that really started pushing arbitration and mediation, alternative dispute resolution, ADRs, really big. And the champions say it's so much faster than litigation, it's so much cheaper. And because the arbitrators oftentimes are subject matter experts, you get more correct results than you do with going to court. And even, the judiciaries, the judicial spokesmen were saying, this will help take a lot of the load off the court system if we go more to ADR instead of litigation. But I think she's probably got a really good point here. The concept of mandatory medical arbitration is rooted in purely financial, not ethical motivation, and was spearheaded by Wall Street and insurance companies in the 1980s to increase profits. After one court case questioning the prudence of mandatory medical arbitrations, one judge opined that mandatory medical arbitration laws are a, quote, get out of jail free card for all potential transgressions. The right to appeal can be forfeited with mandatory arbitration. Discovery and cross-examination of witnesses can be compromised. The state of California calls medical arbitration laws procedurally unconscionable. Now, that's not a word that you hear very often, unconscionable. It's a good word to look up. I can't give you a definition from the tip of my tongue, but if you look at the Uniform Commercial Code, one of the bases for setting aside the provisions of a contract is unconscionability. In other words, something it shocks the conscience so much that our legal mechanism cannot be used to enforce it. So that's what California says. Now, if it were Tennessee or Mississippi or Oklahoma, I'd put a lot of value in it. Coming from California, well, not so much. Physicians that practice in locations with mandatory medical arbitration laws pay significantly less malpractice insurance rates. Perhaps this contributes to the vehement opposition by island physicians and healthcare facilities? I've come to the conclusion that mandatory medical arbitration essentially nullifies the legal protections we've been granted in the Bill of Rights. Article 6, jury trial, confrontation of witnesses, etc. The Sixth Amendment. It has been my experience that healthcare workers go above and beyond to ensure that patients receive good medical care. But unfortunately, as humans, mistakes happen. Some patients require very expensive long-term care after medical mistakes. How can a family provide that care without just compensation when negligence has occurred? Why should healthcare providers not be held responsible if negligence occurred? Mandatory medical arbitration can cost $100,000 or more. I can't afford that. Can you? Even on my salary as a radio talk show host, I couldn't afford that. Yeah, so that's Lynn Wolf. And then we have a guy named Bill Cundiff, who's a regular columnist in the Daily News, who says, Woodrow Call said, now let's take a break for the big halftime show, and we'll come back to Mr. Cundiff here.
Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Aftershocks rock the California-Nevada border. I'm Carmen Roberts, Fox News. Dozens of aftershocks still causing tremors in the area after a 6.0 magnitude earthquake hit yesterday afternoon. Sarah Minson with the U.S. Geological Survey says this quake was not like the ones Californians usually feel.
That isn't actually a boundary between any tectonic plate. That whole area is under extension. It's being pulled to the west.
The 6.0 quake was centered about 250 miles east of San Francisco with aftershocks as strong as 4.9. The mid-Atlantic states facing a threat of flash floods as Tropical Storm Elsa moves up the east coast with 50-mile-an-hour winds and heavy rain. The National Hurricane Center says Elsa may spark flash flooding. The storm's approaching the New Jersey shore as it heads north. Crews at the condo collapse in Florida now focused on finding the remains of victims. The number of known dead, 64, with 76 still missing.
The priority here now is no longer digging for survivors, but finding the remains of those who perished for the families to have closure that they want and also for them to arrange for proper funerals.
Fox's Phil Keating. And President Biden moves up the exit date from Afghanistan.
I will not send another generation of Americans to war in Afghanistan with no reasonable expectation of achieving a different outcome.
The U.S. mission in Afghanistan will end August 31st, 12 days sooner than the 20th anniversary of 9/11, President Biden's first deadline. Biden says he trusts the Afghan military can defend itself from the threat of a Taliban takeover. And at this stage, it's the responsibility of the Afghan people, not the U.S., to nation build.
Fox's Jackie Heinrich. And the Dow dropped 259 points. America's listening to Fox News.
Leah Dunca from Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Get your shot and win big prizes, Guam. The Office of the Governor and the Guam Visitors Bureau presents Vax and Win, Guam. Protect our community by getting your shot and enter online at visitguam.com/vax for a chance to win. Starting June 14th through July 21st, weekly prizes of $10,000 cash and a brand new car will be given away to lucky residents who are fully vaccinated. That's 6 weeks of Vax and Win opportunities. Some conditions apply. Log on to visitguam.com/vax for official promo rules or to submit your entry today.
The rapid spread of the Delta COVID variant causes Japan to ban spectators from the Tokyo Olympics just 2 weeks away. Meantime, Colorado Governor Polis is canceling his state's emergency COVID orders.
That includes the COVID-19 health emergency order that was issued all the way back when the pandemic began. Here is a quote from the governor. "This has been a challenging year for our state and country. We've experienced pain and loss, but through it all, Coloradans did their part, made good choices by wearing masks, socially distancing, and sacrificing moments with loved ones. And we succeeded in having one of the lowest COVID fatality rates in the nation." The governor also pointing out that more than 70% of eligible Coloradans have received at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine.
Alex Rose with Fox 31 Denver. Haiti police arrest at least 17 people for the assassination of the country's president at his home Wednesday.
Earlier this year, the Biden administration had called for President Jovenel Moise to end his rule by decree as he resisted holding elections. Now that he's been assassinated, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said it is still their view that elections should happen this year.
We will call on all political parties, civil society, and stakeholders to work together in the wake of the tragedy and echo the acting prime minister's call for calm.
4 suspects in the assassination of Moise were killed by police. Haitian officials say 2 others arrested are Haitian Americans. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
And the 2021 winner of the Scripps National Spelling Bee won with the word Murraya.
Murraya. That is correct.
The competition last night on ESPN as 14-year-old Zyla Avant-Garde of Louisiana becomes the first African-American champion. I'm Carmen Roberts, and this is Fox News.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Bank Pacific. Happy 67th anniversary. Viva Bank Pacific!
Bank Pacific, serving our Pacific communities for 67 years. Where others put branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Equal housing lender, member FDIC.
Pastrami is back at Subway. Pepper-crusted beef layered with crispy pickles, mustard, and melted provolone cheese. Nothing comes close to the pleasure of sinking your teeth into that chewy, juicy, well-seasoned pastrami. It's happiness in a sub. Head down to the nearest Subway restaurant and satisfy your craving for the deli perfection that is pastrami. Subway. Eat fresh. Pastrami sub is available to all Subway locations on Guam and Saipan, including NCS for a limited time only.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Yeah, just a real quick announcement, Bob, before we begin the second half. Some people have noticed that we are not broadcasting on Facebook right now. Apparently, the borders are closed for us. But we are broadcasting on YouTube. If you go to youtube.com and search for Bob Klitzkie, his own page on YouTube, you'll see that we are streaming live. You also see the archives of the other shows, the previous shows, because we also always broadcast simultaneously on YouTube or live stream on YouTube and Facebook every day during our programs. And there is also a chat function. So if you do have an account with YouTube, which is free to join, you can do that, sign up for it, and then you'll be able to chat with everybody else in the chat room or in a little chat pane window there on the side. So welcome those who are watching on YouTube, and we should be back next week on Facebook as well.
And I have to announce the beginning of a little contest here, and that is, do I look better on YouTube or on Facebook?
You look a little taller.
Yeah. Well, it is the name of the show is Tall Tales, right? All right, I want to go back to this article here by William Cundiff. He starts out and he says, Bill 112 is the right thing for poor and middle class. Woodrow F. Call said, quote, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. My sister had her arm operated on. Her vein was damaged, and now for the rest of her life, her fingers are numb, and she sometimes drops what she's holding. She cannot pursue any relief. She doesn't have the money required to do so. My cousin told me that his dad was operated on and died soon after of infection. My cousin's family felt it was a botched operation. They decided not to pursue medical malpractice because they do not have the money. It appears that the present law was calculatedly passed to keep poor and middle-class citizens from getting some relief for medical malpractice. The cost to pursue medical malpractice is cost prohibitive and out of reach for them. Families and victims who didn't pursue medical malpractice suffered deeply in silence. From my corner, Speaker Therese Terlahi and the 10 senators who are co-sponsors of Bill 112 are doing the right thing for our poor and middle-class citizens. They're leveling the playing field. Bill 112 is quite unpopular among medical community, but senators know they're doing the right thing. Let's get it done and give our poor people a fighting chance to pursue medical malpractice relief without costing them an arm and a leg. That sounds like something I'd say, Jose.
Oh, that's really in there. Yikes.
By the way, Bill 112 will also benefit those who are economically solvent. Perhaps another way is for hospitals to buy liability insurance to cover doctors, much like car insurance. If something happens, victims can sue the insurance company. Doctors and clinics who threaten to leave and punish our people should pass Bill 112 and become law, should scurry and pack their bags and leave already. Yeah. So I mentioned this many times before. You could phrase it as a gag, good news, bad news. If Bill 112 passes, the good news is you'll be able to sue doctors for medical malpractice. The bad news is there won't be any doctors left to sue. And then, of course, as Cundiff points out here so clearly, there's a dimension of classism involved here. The doctors have the deep pockets, meaning they're financially pretty well fixed as a group. A lot of the folks who, for whom medical malpractice is an issue, don't have much money. So the people that don't have money don't have access to the courts, and because they don't have access to the courts, you wind up with some real horror stories, like people who, suffered medical malpractice and then they're bedridden for long periods of time, and their relatives have to take care of them without any help at all. I've mentioned before that tort law has a couple of functions. One function is it has a deterrent function, and that is that if people know that if they are negligent, they may get sued and it might cost them money, it tends to make people more cautious. In the absence of that kind of situation, you have what's called the moral hazard. And a moral hazard means that even if you do something you shouldn't do, there's no risk. You're not going to pay for it. And this is one of the considerations with the different kinds of insurance. If you have car insurance and you get into a serious car accident, it's not going to cost you any money. You're not going to have to pay the other driver. You're not going to have to pay to fix your car. Are you as careful as you would be if you knew it all came out of your own pocket? That's what moral hazard means. So I think you could make a good argument that right now what doctors want, let's protect the moral hazard. So I put this old Supreme Court case on the calendar going back to kind of William Cundiff. And the court case is called Gideon versus Wainwright. It's a 1963 case. It was actually the beginning of the criminal procedure revolution under, I'm looking at the screen and you just appeared on my screen, Jose. Am I looking at a recording? I guess so, huh? I'm not looking at a real time.
Could be a little bit of a delay.
Well, it had to go back to the break. I guess I'm not looking at real time. Well, never mind. I'll get a chance to look at it. I'll watch it when I get home, right? Yeah.
I'll tell you about it later.
Yeah, okay. So Gideon versus Wainwright. In 1963, there was no constitutional right to counsel in a criminal trial, in a state criminal trial. If you were busted for if you were busted for robbery or burglary in any one of the 50 states, you were not, and if you couldn't hire a lawyer, you didn't get a lawyer. That was that simple. And Clarence Gideon was busted for breaking into a store for basically a very low-level burglary, and he was sentenced to 5 years in the Florida pen. And Clarence Gideon, at that time, got out paper and pencil, not pen, but a pencil, and went to the prison library and put together a petition for writ of certiorari. First of all, he appealed to the Florida Supreme Court. The trial court was sustained. Then he put together his handwritten petition for a writ of certiorari and sent it off to the United States Supreme Court. Well, at that time, there was a justice named William O. Douglas, who was something of a kook, if you ever look up William Douglas. Kind of a strange guy, very, very liberal, always on the lookout for the little guy. And he instructed his law clerks to try and find these handwritten pro se petitions for cert, because he really got a kick out of granting cert and getting these cases on the Supreme Court docket. Well, they granted cert in Gideon's case. And so the case was put on the Supreme Court docket. The Supreme Court then appointed a lawyer for Gideon, and they appointed a gentleman named Abe Fortas, one of the most famous lawyers in the United States at that time, who was a partner in a firm called Arnold and Fortas, lawyer to presidents and senators and whatever. Fortas became a Supreme Court justice himself and went down in flames. So he handled Gideon's case, and Gideon won. So the Florida case was reversed and remanded. He was retried, and he got off. The jury brought in a not guilty verdict in 1 hour. So what's this got to do with medical malpractice?
Good question.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked it, Jose. Well, what it's got to do, what it stands for is this, that if you haven't figured this out already, I think the United States is the greatest country ever. And we started out with founding documents that didn't set up something that was perfect right out of the chute. It was really good right out of the chute, but it was aspirational. In other words, the founders had an imagination for something that continued to improve. So although in 1963, if you were accused of a serious felony in state court, you didn't get any lawyer. What chance does anybody have? You could be as innocent as the day is long, and a determined prosecutor is probably going to be able to put you away. The famous story of the defendant who defended himself is cross-examining a witness who had an eyewitness who had identified him, and the defendant defending himself said, "Ma'am, are you absolutely sure that it was me that you saw?" And the witness says, "Yes, I'm absolutely sure it was you that I saw." "How can you be so sure when I was wearing a mask?" Needless to say, that guy...
He was his own witness.
He didn't get off on that one. So, just thinking about it now in 2021, anybody going before the court for a serious crime, for a felony back in those days, without a lawyer, he's just SOL from the beginning. He has no chance. because he didn't have enough money to buy a lawyer, to hire a lawyer. So because of Gideon, we now have public defenders and court-appointed attorneys, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, of course, a lot more defendants get off, which some people would say is a bad result. But at least we can say we're constantly working on providing justice in our courts, going back again to the aspirational aspects of the founding fathers. How does that work when we hear all these people saying, you can't bring, no matter how egregious the medical malpractice, you're not going to be able to get into court unless you can come up with 50 grand in advance. And of course, lawyers are not going to take these cases on contingency, so you're just not going to get there. So that's the reason that I brought up Gideon versus Wainwright. It really is not what lawyers would say is on all fours with medical malpractice arguments that we're having right now. But it does shed some light on the aspirational aspects of a way that we could look at our court system and our sense of justice. End of today's homily. Okay, let me go on to Therese versus the Chief Justice. This would be a really good time to see who I've got in the green room, I guess. It's probably R. Carl. I've got a doctor on the line. He's probably going to come call in and defend the triple M double A, right, Jose? Yeah.
And more.
Yeah, okay, so I've got a doctor calling in here. Go ahead, Doc. Let it go.
Happy Senator, happy Guam. Yeah, Gideon case is a classic case of, Henry Fonda played Gideon to a T back about in the 1970s. I think they made a movie, Gideon's Trumpet.
Right.
It was a wonderful, wonderful, great movie. And also it's a really good Supreme Court case. And one thing, if anybody's interested, you can get online and look at the original, hand-scrawled petition he sent to the U.S. Supreme Court. I mean, he wrote it basically on prison stationery or a kind of prison form stationery, and it was very straightforward. And I feel it gave me a lot of confidence in our justice system that they took his simple prisoner's petition very seriously, and they saw his point. And I thought that's one of the other nice things about the Gideon story. One thing I was going to mention quickly about medical malpractice, and there's a few basic items that I think are pretty important to the discussion. First is, because of the way the system's set up, we don't have any data on how many cases there are, or even if people have even tried to even use a process.
Well, actually, Ron, I think we do have data on how many cases have been arbitrated. Does the word zero mean anything to you?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Is that because of the way the system's set up, we have a non-process, and I certainly agree with that. And I certainly also feel that if we even had an ability, not necessarily to see how many are even arbitrated, but just to track complaints, even if they're not, fully processed by this arbitration process, that would even be a great help. We don't even track even simple complaints in this area. And I hope that can be part of the discussion. Like, for example, if somebody, I know there's different policies in different ways, and I want to also briefly mention the three laws, the 1975 law, the 1991 law, and now the current Bill 112. All three are very interesting. The 1975 law was very good. It had procedures, it had timelines, it had definitions of things. In the 1991 law, they did exactly as you just mentioned at the beginning of our conversation. They threw it all to AAA, which created a black hole of doing nothing. I call it a doorbell to nowhere. I mean, nothing gets done under that particular system very well. I know Keogh mentioned, I think he'd mentioned he might know of 7 cases in the last 30 years, from what I recall from a media report, but that would be about it. They're simple in a jurisdiction our size, we should be having 7 to 8 cases per year, I believe, and we certainly don't see or hear about those. But I think that the current process can be improved, and regardless of whether it's under Bill 112 or any other effort, I think it's well worth our public's interest to try to make the process work better. Our public does deserve better. The problem is part of the problem is doctors apparently don't police themselves very well. It should be just as lawyers, you have a bar association, you have an ethics prosecutor, the bar and lawyers police their own profession. The medical community doesn't really do that. They don't have a tradition, at least in our jurisdiction, of having that strong peer review process, which should be a little bit of the riddle also. So I think that all of these things are well worth discussing, and I'm glad that our senators are discussing them, regardless of whether this bill is passed or not or approved into law. It's a discussion that should continue until the process is fixed.
I agree, Doc, and coming from a doctor, that's quite a mouthful, too.
Well, when my daughter was little and she learned to use the cell phone, she's talking on the phone with her friend. She's about 6 years old. She says, "Yeah, my dad's a doctor, but he can't help anybody." So.
Okay, Ron. Well,
all right, sir.
Good insights. Thanks for calling in. Okay, so I'm surprised that another Joe hasn't called in yet. Almost the end of the week, and here we are we're Joeless. Okay, next on the card, I've got Therese versus the Chief Justice. And this is an article out of the Post where Therese answers back to the Chief Justice's opposition to her bill. Supreme Court Chief Justice Philip Carbolito has weighed in on Bill 112, stating that the judiciary simply does not have the resources to meet the mandates of the bill as written. The judiciary does not have, quote, the judiciary does not have financial or personnel resources to meet the mandates of Bill 112 should it become law in its present form, Carbolito stated. Without adequate funding to support the required resources, the magistrate judges will be unable to effectively and efficiently conduct pretrial screening and processing of malpractice claims as contemplated by Bill 112. The judiciary respectfully requests consideration of additional appropriations and a prospective effective date for Bill 112. Well, we saw that, and that all makes a certain amount of sense. Let's head for Wrigley Field in the 7th inning stretch, and I'll come back to Therese versus EJ.
Hafaday, this is Congressman Nicholas. Your congressional office would like to remind you that pandemic unemployment assistance is set to expire on September 6th of this year. We encourage the people of Guam to seek out active employment as much as possible, as jobs continue to remain limited, and we want to prevent hardship for our people at the conclusion of the PUA program. Thank you, and see to us, Mahase.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
This Liberation Day, join PBS Guam as we take you village to village, paying tribute to those who've made sacrifices for us to live as we do today. Tune in on July 21st at 9 a.m. and experience over 3 hours of exclusive interviews, musical performances, and more. This celebration of Guam's 77th will air on PBS Guam, KGTF, Channel 12, and streaming on the PBS Guam Facebook and YouTube pages. This special broadcast is made possible by PBS Guam, our generous supporters, and Choice Broadcasting.
Okay, so here we are, Wrigley Field, Chicago, Illinois, the 7th inning stretch, meaning we only got 2 more innings, the Tall Tales left this week. Whoa. Well, we are where we are, so we got to make the best of it. I'm going to go to Therese versus the CJ, which I've already started here. And I left off, let's see. The judiciary does not have financial or personnel resources to meet the mandates of Bill 112. Without adequate funding to support the required resources, the magistrate judges will be unable to effectively and efficiently conduct pretrial screening and processing of malpractice claims as contemplated by Bill 112. The judiciary respectfully requests consideration of additional appropriations and a prospective effective date for Bill 112. Jose, they asked me to be the MC at the next Red Ball.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and I said, I can't do that. I don't have a tuxedo. Yeah. And the person that gave me the invite said, well, can't you buy or rent a tuxedo? And I said, I never thought of that. So
you simply didn't have a tuxedo.
I simply didn't have a tuxedo. Yeah. Yeah. Just amazing, isn't it? Yeah. In response to the bill's main sponsor, Speaker Terlahi stated that the judiciary already handles malpractice lawsuits, which is why the bill assumes the court is able to handle claims. And other jurisdictions also have pretrial screening panels managed by the judicial branch. However, concerns about the need to prepare for implementation are valid. Makes a certain amount of sense. Ideally, magistrates and judges receive continuous training in the handling of varied matters before them. Now, I suspect that the judges have training in their therapeutic court disciplines, which the court jumped into without saying, without any kvetching at all. The judiciary's need to prepare for implementation of a change in law is valid and expected. Expert witness fees are borne by each party under Bill 112. Just as they are under the current law, and would not impose an additional financial burden on the courts. The Speaker also noted that a confirmation hearing for an additional judge is set for next week. So she's going checklisting and going down one by one, right? Which should help the court address a backlog of cases. Carbolito said Bill 112 would exacerbate their backlog without more resources. Back to Therese. In addition, the judiciary is expected to receive a portion of the ARP funds, which should also assist with its finances, the Speaker said, referring to the Federal American Rescue Plan. Now, I got to jump in here again. The court is backlogged. Rev tax is way, way backlogged. I suspect a couple of other government agencies are. What do you do when you get behind?
Well, for revenue tax, we just stop taxing.
Yeah. Well, the ordinary approach that when you get backlogged, when you get behind, is you work longer, right? So I noticed that Rev Tax is staying open till 7 o'clock at night. They're open on Saturdays. No, we got to just keep doing things the way we've always done them, and just say, well, if you don't like it, we have a backlog. The same with the courts. Now, the courts didn't shut down, but they might as well have, because almost nothing got done during that whole pandemic time. And I would offer the same thing there. Maybe it's time to hire some judges pro tempore. Maybe it's time to have some night court. Maybe it's time to catch up on that backlog instead of just saying, well, we've got a backlog, we're way behind, and we'll always be behind because we haven't given any thought to catching up. Bill 112 is also known as the Medical Malpractice Pretrial Screening Act, would replace the current mandatory arbitration process with a confidential pretrial screening process before a magistrate judge, etc. Most states have some form of pre-lawsuit mediation, screening, or review in malpractice cases, but none have as stringent an arbitration requirement as Guam. And that's the way we like it. Vice Speaker Tina Munya Barnes, also known as Bailout, had earlier retracted her support of Bill 112, wrote to Carbolito in June asking him for some ammunition to shoot the bill down. Carbolito's concern include the date of implementation, which is currently upon enactment, which is a stroke of a pen. He asked for a prospective date of 1 year to give the judiciary time to set up the process and prepare for malpractice lawsuits. Magistrate judges will also need specialized training and education to oversee the complexities of medical malpractice cases, and the judiciary has neither the funding nor internal expertise to provide this. Well, of course not, because you're not doing it now. I wonder how much appropriation there is for the drug court, the veterans court, the family violence court, the bad breath court. Just as you were, additional public hearings on Bill 112 are scheduled or will be scheduled this month. The Guam medical community has vehemently opposed Bill 112 through testimony from many of its members who argue that it would adversely affect health care on island. The bill's first public hearing Wednesday saw provider after provider voice concerns as the hearing extended well into the night. Those concerns include losing certain care for patients due to the risk of practicing outside one's specific specialty, which is sometimes necessary on Guam, an island in need of more providers. Some physicians have already stopped providing certain services, although the law remains the same for now, and the standard of care definition is the same between current law and Bill 112. Lawmakers also heard from proponents, some of whom are family members of those who have been hurt by alleged malpractice, who say mandatory arbitration is cost-prohibitive for those seeking accountability. Resident Ken Leon Guerrero said the bill has to be looked at within the context of medicine as a business. And any other business on island, if there's a situation, the patient or customer has legal recourse. Healthcare is the one area where legal recourse does not exist, Leon Guerrero said. Earlier this week, before the public hearing, members of the medical community hosted a press conference to discuss their opposition to the bill. A number of issues were discussed with the media, including concerns with costs and alternatives to Bill 112. Guam Memorial Hospital Authority Administrator Lillian Perez Posadas advocated additional funds to be given to Guam's licensing boards so those groups can vet malpractice claims currently handled by arbitrators. What we would do then, according to her, send it to the Guam Board of Medical Examiners, who would then decide whether the claim was meritorious enough to go before the courts. Questionable constitutionality. And the Guam Board of Medical Examiners doesn't exactly have a chrome-plated reputation either, according to some of its critics. However, while the licensing boards do investigate complaints as they relate to the board's relevant laws, as noted by the speaker during the public hearing Wednesday, the boards do not award monetary compensation for damages, which is the dominion of a tort claim. Now, I know of at least one situation where a mother brought a son to a doctor for medical care. The doctor was transported to the hospital emergency room. He lived, but he wound up bedridden for the rest of his life, which was about 8 years. And there was no compensation coming from the arguably negligent medical provider or clinic. So here's a mother taking care of a bedridden son for 8 years. The Guam Board of Medical Examiners is not going to help you with that. That's why we have courts. That's why we have tort claims. Going on to Dr. Nathaniel Berg, answering a question about who would be liable under Bill 112, stated additional clarity was placed in 112 to ensure certain people can be targeted for claims. And remember, and he doesn't tell us who was targeted for claims. And then here's a quote from Berg. And remember, this was written by Mr. Keogh. 2 attorneys, Tetlahi and Keogh, wrote this bill. Now, we shouldn't let lawyers ever write bills, that's for sure.
What do they know about bills?
Well,
legislation?
Absolutely. If we could get this fellow out in front here, probably wouldn't charge a thing, right? Yeah. So what I can imagine and what I wonder, and I wonder why else would you do it? Make it really clear that we can go after the nurses, because nurses are #1 target for malpractice. Be sure to name them specifically, Berg said. Keogh appears to refer to Robert Keogh, an attorney who has supported Bill 112 and a change to the arbitration law. It's unclear who Berg was referring to with attorney Tetlahi. Unclear to whom? Wouldn't that be Therese Tetlahi, the speaker and the author of this bill? Who else could it be? This hanging this wreath around Keogh's neck just seems not the kind of thing that we encourage. Lawyers, I've done it myself, drafting bills on a pro bono basis for senators. One of them even got introduced. Clint introduced one of my bills one time. The real danger is that bills are drafted by people who aren't lawyers and don't know what they're doing, and it happens all the time. Going on, the Arbitration Act defines health professional as any person who's licensed or certified to practice the healing arts within the territory of Guam. Nurses would already fall under this definition. Yeah, if you read Therese's bill, it doesn't change any of those things. Bill 112 keeps that definition for health care provider, but also includes a non-exhaustive list of specific professions, including nursing and a medical care facility and its officers or employees. Now, I need to explain the difference between a justum generis and expresso unius est exclusio alterius. If you say, I'll give you an example of the first one, of the second one first, exclusio expresso unius. A veterinary practice is limited to dogs, cats, hippopotami, and rattlesnakes. That would be expresso unius exclusio alterius, right? This would be a justum generis. A veterinarian's practice includes dogs, cats, hippopotami, and rattlesnakes. That doesn't exclude elephants, etc. It's an example of what a veterinary can treat. Ajustum is example, exclusio is limitation. And tres is ajustum. That's why doctors shouldn't practice law. Lawyers shouldn't practice medicine. These are the same professionals covered under the MMAA and are now equally extended the special pretrial process under Bill 112, Terlahi said. The speaker also denied that Keogh was involved with the bill's drafting. I wrote this bill along with Senator Tello Taitigui.
She had permission, Bob.
Well, who is the chairperson on Medical Malpractice Subcommittee. Attorney Keogh has provided input, including through public hearing processes, did attorneys for clinics and hospitals. Doctors submitted a bill for my consideration, but I declined that bill because the cost mechanism was insufficient. This is part of the legislative process. The doctors need to stick to the facts. Yeah, absolutely. I went to medical school, not to law school, so I won't be able to make any legal arguments about the bill. So help me out here, because I'm left with nothing but cheap shots. It's just exactly what we saw, cheap shots. Rob Keogh made sure he included the nurses. Yeah. All right. Okay, I'm going to go back to what Macris wrote on the 1st of July. Whatever the cause, most healthcare providers on Guam abhor unexpected patient mortality and morbidity, but some could care less. He actually means some couldn't care less, right? Not some could care. In the U.S., 1% of physicians were responsible for 32% of paid malpractice claims. On Guam, the health care providers' mafia of sorts enforces omerta, which means silence, by punishing healthcare providers' staff who attempt to expose even serially injurious provider, quote, sacred cows or practices. Boy, Macris sounds like kind of a would-be poet here with his...
It was a dark and stormy night.
Two doctors diverged in a snowy wood.
We need some mood music.
Yeah. So he showed his ability. I don't know if, I think he's a good doctor, but he certainly showed his ability to turn a phrase here, didn't he? Yeah, so he's saying that, we got some people that don't care about patient mortality at all, and that they would counsel anybody in the healthcare profession that comes forward and says that doctor over there is a serial malpractice committer. But the sacred cows in the medical profession are, quote, hands off. I guess I could milk this one a little bit more, but I'll just let it go there. Healthcare providers' caucuses can make decisions based on politics and money without following rules of evidence. Out-of-control healthcare provider boards, administrators, and committees can conduct sham peer reviews and invent violations which threaten the employment, privileges, and licenses of whistleblowers, to do so with qualified immunity and without oversight. Public Law 24-84 intended to improve medical practice by shielding peer review findings done at local hospitals and mandatory arbitration, meant to attract and retain qualified, meaning insurable, healthcare providers, have failed, if not backfired. Healthcare provider regulatory agency members need to be very, very carefully vetted. Peer review committee and licensing board adverse actions should be unenforceable until there is an evidentiary hearing and a judicial determination. Whistleblower, healthcare provider, staff, if employees, whether private, classified or unclassified by law, should be placed on paid leave or allowed to practice until such determination is made. When industries or professions ineffectively regulate themselves in a manner that creates hazards to health and public safety, lawyers unfortunately need to get involved. Any proposed medical malpractice reform should include a statute of limitations, which we have, and reasonable award caps. And this is George Macris, a former GM, Guam Memorial Medical Director, former Guam Medical Society President, former Guam Board of Medical Examiners member, and a retired Navy Reserve medical officer who practices in Florida and Hawaii. He is certified by the American Board of Internal Medicine and American Board of Preventive Medicine in undersea and hyperbaric medicine. He will not bend to your will. He lives in Tarpon Springs, Florida. Remember, this is how he started off. Whatever the cause, most healthcare providers on Guam abhor unexpected patient mortality and morbidity, but some could care less. So that's kind of the environment in which we're operating here, according to somebody who's been on the inside. Okay, let's head for Churchill Downs.
Chili's is bringing you a full meal offer with 3 for Me for just $15. You get a beverage, a starter, and an entree. First, choose from a refreshing Coca-Cola or iced tea, pick a starter, then select your choice of a mouth-watering entree, like Cajun pasta with grilled chicken, ranchero chicken tacos, or the savory Santa Fe burger. Dine in today or visit chilisguam.com for delivery and to-go options. Chili's, 3 for Me for just $15. Available for a limited time. Chili's, savor the moment.
Attention men and women in uniform, veterans and reservists, ready for the 77th Liberation Hike and Bike. Get up and move with the Silkies Hike. And easy bike along Marine Corps Drive with stops at historic sites and monuments with a super hot cool down at Paseo. Hike rally at 7 a.m. on Liberation Day in Assen. Bike rally 7 a.m. at Paseo. Let's beat suicide with humor and camaraderie. Sign up at Eventbrite. Look for Silkies Hike Guam 1 and check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Made possible by Gotcha 671, Irreverent Warriors, Freedom Grinders, and Veterans Helping Veterans.
Well, by now you've probably heard that former President Trump has sued Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I suspect a lot of folks are sitting back and saying, "What? It's about time. What about the First Amendment?" Those guys are not paying any attention to the First Amendment. Well, in order to lay the foundation for this column here that quotes Alan Dershowitz, a prominent trial attorney who used to be a real hard lefty, but seems to be kind of pinging the left an awful lot lately, which is probably because they need to be pinged. Here's what the First Amendment says. Congress shall make no law prohibiting, as you were abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Congress shall make no law. Well, because of a case called Gitlow versus New York back in the 1920s, the Supreme Court has held that means that neither Congress nor any state shall make any law. The legal fiction is that the due process and equal protection clauses of the 14th Amendment include the Bill of Rights and make them applicable to the states, which is another story. But you remember that our Bill of Rights is a set of negative rights. It doesn't say everybody is entitled to chicken every Sunday and 2 cars in every garage or anything like that. It just the Bill of Rights tell you what the government can't do to you. So when I think it was R. Carl said something about the government cracking down on Facebook, etc., didn't I think that was a good idea? My response was no, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think the government should get involved in suppressing even the most egregious misuses of speech or lack thereof, which is certainly the case with Facebook. I just wouldn't want to start down that slippery slope. But Trump has actually brought suit against those 3. And let's turn to Alan Dershowitz, who told Newsmax on Wednesday that former President Trump's lawsuit against social media companies is very, very important, as if we didn't know, and a complicated case. When asked about Trump's suit against Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, Dershowitz said, this is a very, very important lawsuit. What's going on with high tech is unacceptable. It's inconsistent with the spirit of free speech that underlies our First Amendment. You know, the spirit, which is true. This is a complicated case because, as the president pointed out, and as somebody named Pam Bondi pointed out, the others pointed out, these are not just ordinary private companies. They have special exemption. That is, as platforms, they can't be held liable for defamation of people that use those platforms. A special deal, Section 230 of the Decency and Communications Act, special deal just for them. Okay, so they have a special exemption, and therefore they partake of some kind of government action. And the courts will have to parse this issue. He added, what we don't want is the government telling private companies what they can say and what they can do. That would be wrong. But we don't want these crazy, public, enormous, monopolistic companies restricting our free speech. The current situation is unacceptable, and this lawsuit, I think, will shake things up considerably, though I can't predict in the end how it will come out. Dershowitz said that it will be interesting to see how the courts deal with it. It's a complicated and difficult case. There is an argument about private companies, and the argument on the other side is they're not really private, and the courts are going to have to resolve that. There's some precedent. There's a case called Marsh v. Alabama, where a town owned by a company, forbade free speech, and the Supreme Court said, no, although it's owned by a company, it partakes of the public, and therefore the First Amendment applies. So I suppose the argument is going to be Section 230 is state action, and therefore, although Facebook is not a government agency, when it censors people, it is engaged in state action. It's kind of like a case called Shelley versus Kramer, which outlawed restrictive covenants and deeds based on race, although you couldn't outlaw that in a deed. You did find state action because the state recorded the deeds. So I got some hope for you for the weekend. Buy a copy of Pacific Island Times, turn to page 5. Page 6, you will find an article about your favorite talk show host. So let's talk about that on Monday.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Getting out faster. I'm Carmen Roberts, Fox News. President Biden says he's ordering U.S. troops out of Afghanistan more than 1 week sooner than his originally announced date of 9/11.
The U.S. will be completely out of Afghanistan by August 31st, but President Biden says it's not a mission accomplished moment.
No, there's no mission accomplished.
How would you describe it?
The mission was accomplished in that we got Osama bin Laden, and terrorism is not emanating from that part of the world.
The president says Afghan security forces have the capacity to fend off the Taliban, which has made significant advances in recent weeks.
Fox's Rachel Sutherland. The Interfax news agency reporting this morning, Russia's foreign ministry says the Taliban currently holds more than 2/3 of the Afghan-Tajik border. As the Delta variant of the coronavirus raises fears of another COVID wave, Pfizer says it plans to ask federal regulators to approve a third dose of its vaccine.
The company says another shot within 12 months could boost immunity against the virus and possibly ward off variants. But hours after Pfizer made that known, regulators said, not so fast. The Food and Drug Administration and the CDC put out a joint statement saying health agencies are working to consider if a booster is necessary. They said any decision on booster shots would happen when the science demonstrates they're needed. Jill Nato, Fox News.
Tropical storm Elsa is drenching the Delaware area as it moves towards the New Jersey shore. The National Hurricane Center says Elsa will dump heavy rains across New England today and may cause flash flooding. And on the West Coast, aftershocks are rumbling the Nevada-Northern California border after yesterday's big 6.0 quake centered about 250 miles east of San Francisco. America's listening to Fox News.
Jason in the House, the Jason Chaffetz Podcast.